I was stuck. 2 years into COVID, and I was feeling more trapped than I had in those first few locked down months. I was trapped between the world as I wanted it to be, the world as people kept telling me it was again, and the world as it actually was. We were all so desperate to return to normal. A few minutes ago, actually, I saw some of you applaud when it was announced that you would no longer be required to wear masks next week. And I saw some of you sort of shrink into your chairs like, ugh, how does that feel? We were there. We've been there for years, it feels like. People were returning to their lives, trying to figure out how to go back or to pick up where they left off, and that felt wrong. It felt too soon. Or maybe too late. Impossible, at any rate. Life was not going back to the way it had been, even if I was ready to go back in the world. So many people that I loved, particularly the vulnerable amongst us, couldn't. But even as our return felt premature and risky, the adaptations that we had made were feeling inadequate. They were wearing thin. The video technologies that had gotten us through began to feel more and more inadequate. The longing to actually be with the people we loved, to do the things we loved, or even just the things we sort of liked, was palpable. Tell me if this story sounds familiar. One day, my wife said that it wasn't such a big deal to forego maskless grocery shopping for the rest of our lives, at which point I completely lost it. I was so mad. Not because she was wrong exactly, although in the moment I felt she was, but because the thought of losing this small normalcy felt like one thing too many, one thing too far, and this was the hill I was going to die on. Any of you die on some real silly hills during COVID? Fight with people you loved about small differences? So I was stuck. And look, I'm a minister. It is my job to help people unstick themselves from spiritual crises. And that's what this was. It was a spiritual crisis. Probably a midlife crisis as well, but that's a story for a different day. And I have excellent tools. I can meditate, I can pray, I can talk to a trusted advisor, a therapist, or a minister. I can spend time in nature, reflect on what I love, gaze at my beloveds, journal and practice gratitude. And I did those things, sort of. And then I ran away from home. My wife and I packed all of our belongings, sold our house, and bought the biggest car that two climate conscious, sort of hippie adjacent people can manage, which is a Subaru Outback, in case you were wondering. The Unitarian Universalist of cars. We packed our stuff and our son and his stuff, hence the diapers, and we hit the road. The idea was to drive around the country, seeing all the people we loved and those who we missed when our lives were being lived inside. We drove to New Orleans, and my son, a COVID baby who barely knew other kids existed, got swept into his pack of cousins. He seemed bewildered, but game. My wife and I went to the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival and simultaneously burst into tears when the crowd started singing the refrain to a song. After years of telling ourselves, of trying to believe that recorded music was just as good and that we didn't miss singing along, we felt our souls unfurl towards the sound. We made our way back to Vermont for the summer. We splashed in creeks and tried to avoid ticks and breathed deeply for what seemed like the first time. We made friends with the people at the farm stands and learned which ones had the outstanding tomatoes, not just the very, very good tomatoes. Even if it wasn't the most comfortable, we visited small, hardy New England churches that felt rooted in time and place, so rooted that one of them did not have indoor plumbing. We drove across the American West, threading visits of family and friends like a string of pearls. Each visit shinier, more beloved than the last. And when we landed, 8 glorious months later in the San Francisco Bay Area, my parents welcomed us with joy and care, which is good because we were exhausted and we were done. It turns out that organizing and implementing a once-in-a-lifetime glorious trip, the kind that people sort of turn wistful and envious when you tell them about it, is a lot of work. It's good not to mention that to those people because you sound like a jerk, but it is. Moving every few days is amazing, and it requires a lot of mental and physical labor. We were done, so there it was. Our grand adventure had run its course. But it was a little more than just that we were tired. Our trip had filled the wells of love that had been diminished during isolation. We had surrounded ourselves with loved ones and loved places and loved activities. We rewove the threads of connection that had begun to fray in our time apart. And each time we tied ourselves more deeply to a community, we left. Our son played with his cousins for a few weeks, and then we got back on the road. They're still there, weaving their lives more tightly together. We were in Vermont just long enough to know which creeks bore the risk of giardia, which was a fun surprise, and which farm stands had the friendliest people. And then we left. We stayed up late sharing memories with cousins and old friends, and then got up and on the road in the morning. We visited all of these communities, but we weren't really part of them. I think everyone expected us to fall in love with one of them and stay. And instead, we fell in love with all of them and kept leaving. Have you ever done this? Skirted the edge of a community, wanting to be part of it? Maybe. Not quite ready to commit? Maybe because you weren't ready, or because there was another community out there that was better, you were sure of it, or easier, or truer to you. Or maybe because to become part of something means to lose control in some fundamental way. The poet Khalil Gibran offers this. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled, from the peaks of the mountains, the long, winding roads crossing forests and villages. And in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter, there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. We were our own little river, standing at the edge of ocean after ocean. But the problem was not exactly that we didn't want to disappear into the ocean, but that we couldn't quite figure out which one to disappear into. Which ocean would be better? In what ocean would we be happiest? If we pick this one, does it mean we have to say goodbye to all the other ones? And more importantly, which of these oceans had figured itself out enough to welcome us? Ah, well, there it is. We've come to the real problem. Not that we were tired, though we were. Not that we were lonely, though there was that. The problem was that 8 months and 27 states later, we were still the same people we had been when we started. And the world was still the same place it was. We did not become magically unstuck by physically unsticking ourselves. It is tempting, so tempting, to believe that if we can change the external, we will change the internal. How many times have you convinced yourself that your life will start as you want it to be as soon as you fix just one more thing? As soon as you lose those few pounds. I've told myself that terrible story time and time again. As soon as you get a different job or break up with a partner, if you move or leave or go back to school or do a juice cleanse, just one more thing and everything will be right. Unfortunately, all of those things might be good for you. I would argue some of those things are good for you. They might even change your life a little bit, but they're not going to make you a different person, and they won't make the world a different place. The world is stubbornly as it is. It takes a lot more than one of us making one change to shift it. The poet continues, nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because only then will the river know it's not about disappearing into the ocean. It's about becoming the ocean. To become the ocean is to become part of something big enough to unstick you. To commit, to truly commit to a community, is to allow yourself to be part of something big enough that it can actually change you and it can actually change the world. Becoming part of something bigger than you, deeply rooted and enmeshed, means you have less control than you might like. It means letting go of the dreams of other lives and other selves. But it means tapping into the power of what is rather than what might be. The 11th century philosopher Al-Ghazali reminds us, in all that is possible, there's nothing more wondrous than what is. There's no better place out there. There's only this one, made better, made more loving, through the power of all of us together. It is in our nature as people and as Unitarian Universalists, to imagine a better world. It is our work to notice the difference between the world as it is and the world that could yet be. We are not people who are made to be content with small anything, small love, small justice, small beauty. But we come together because we know we cannot build any of that alone. We come together because we need each other more than we know. To live our lives and to imagine our futures, we need each other. We must move together in intentional community, working together, an ocean that cannot be denied. May it be so. Amen.